Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Kevin Steele, and I'll be your host for today's webinar entitled Whole Person Integrative Eating, an evidence-based revisioning of nutritional health and healing. So now, it's my pleasure to introduce Deborah. Deborah has a master's in public health. She's an international nutrition researcher and award-winning author, specializing in preventing and reversing obesity, heart disease, and other diet-related chronic conditions. She was a nutritionist on Dean Ornish, MD's first clinical trial for reversing heart disease and director of nutrition on similar lifestyle medicine research at cardiovascular clinics in Europe. Deborah's principal investigator and founder of Whole Person Integrative Eating, an evidence-based, scientifically sound program for halting, even reversing overeating and weight gain. Obviously, there's quite a need for that. Deborah's work has been featured in Yoga Journal, Health and Spirituality and Health, for which she wrote the Enlightened Diet column, while her books discuss the power of food to heal. A VIP contributor at Thrive Global, Deborah's latest book is the award-winning Whole Person Integrative Eating, a breakthrough dietary lifestyle to treat the root causes of overeating, overweight, and obesity. So you can find out more about her program, her certification program for health professionals at WPIE.org and integrativeeating.com/training. So we're very excited to have Deborah with us today. So Deborah, welcome and take it away. And I'll be back a little bit later in today's presentation.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Steele, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today for my webinar on whole person integrative eating. As you can see from the slide, I am going to be telling you about whole person integrative eating and why I'm describing it as an evidence-based revisioning of nutritional health and healing. What I'm going to be talking about today is whole person integrative eating in the context of what is it and how I discovered it. The key elements of whole person integrative eating, which are what I call the new normal overeating styles, plus the 7-step whole person integrative eating program. And I'll also tell you a bit about the evolution of the training and certification program that I have created in collaboration with a MedFit member for certified and licensed health professionals. So to begin, we're going to talk about discovering it and what it is. And while I'm talking, I'd like to ask you all to keep 2 key concepts in mind. The first key concept is that whole person integrative eating, and you'll hear me refer to this throughout the presentation, it's based on a distillation of ancient food wisdom verified by modern nutritional science. And the second key element is this. When we hear the word diet, it usually means a regimented, restricted way of eating. I am talking about diet in terms of the original meaning of the word diet 2,500 years ago when Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, was living. And he described diet at that time as a way of life. And I am talking about diet in the context of, I'll call it WPIE, as a way of life, not as a regimented, restricted way of eating. I'd also like to begin by introducing you to Dr. Larry Sherwitz, who's the co-founder of Whole Person Integrative Eating. And Larry is a research scientist, a behavioral scientist, and I am sharing this with you because I will be talking about Larry's research that I'm telling you about right now in the context of whole person integrative eating. Larry was the director of research with a physician named Dr. Dean Ornish for almost 20 years. And what Dean Ornish and Larry were able to show is that you can actually halt and reverse heart disease with lifestyle changes alone. This is now called lifestyle medicine, a discipline of medicine. And the 4 components of the lifestyle medicine reversal program, heart disease reversal program, is a no-fat added plant-based diet. I should also mention I was the nutritionist on Dr. Ornish's first clinical trial for reversing heart disease. It's a no-fat added plant-based diet, exercise, social support, and stress management. And in the program for reversing heart disease, stress management means yoga and meditation. And I'm telling you this because these 4 arms of the Ornish Lifestyle Reversal Program are all statistically significant. We'll be coming back to this concept as we talk. And what that means is over the years, people have asked Larry and myself, who have worked on the program, well, which component is most important? And Larry's answer is usually, well, which leg of a dog is more important? These are all statistically significant. One is not necessarily more important than the other in terms of getting regression of heart disease. The journey into whole person integrative eating began in New Delhi, India. And while I was there was a physician named Dr. K.L. Chopra, who's a clinical cardiologist, and he has become, over his lifetime, a devout Hindu. And I was there because Larry was presenting at India's first international conference on lifestyle and health. And he was talking about the Ornish Lifestyle Reversal Program because it's based on the ancient yogic lifestyle. And when I started to interview Dr. K.L. Chopra, who's the father and mentor of well-known author and transformation expert, Dr. Deepak Chopra, when I asked him about yoga and diet, his first response was that prana, the Sanskrit word for consciousness, your prana is infused into food, and in turn, when you cook, your consciousness is infused into the food when you eat, and you ingest it when you eat the food. And that started me on what I call my nutrition journey around the world, because the thought just wouldn't let go about consciousness and a loving consciousness affecting food. Well, what I did was I researched world religions, major world religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, cultural traditions such as yogic nutrition, African American soul food, for example, and Eastern healing systems that include nutrition, which, for example, includes India's Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, systems that are 4,000 or 5,000 years old. Humankind turned to world religions, cultural traditions, Eastern healing system for guidelines on what and how to eat before the evolution of nutritional science as we now know it today, which is only about 100 years old. It's 1 century old. Well, I wrote a book about this, and I'm putting this up because it's a resource. It is based on this ancient food wisdom, nutritional anthropology. And my first book, which includes all this ancient wisdom that I researched, it's called Feeding the Body, Nourishing the Soul. And I was talking with Larry. He is my husband. I did not mention that. Larry is my husband. And I said, how am I going to talk about this? There's so much to communicate. And over a few months, we distilled the wisdom from feeding the body, nourishing the soul, and all this ancient food wisdom into 7 perennial principles. And that includes, we first had words for it, and then we put it into sentences. All the ancient wisdom espouses fresh, whole food. It suggests something about feelings. It suggests something about having a pleasant environment in which to eat, psychologically and aesthetically. It suggests mindfulness. It suggests gratitude and appreciation. We used to bless food. Many people in most countries blessed food for thousands of years. It's not too common anymore. Also savoring and flavoring food with loving regard, coming back to the prana and the loving consciousness that Dr. Chopra alluded to, and also to eat with others in a pleasant atmosphere. And when I put this together and looked at the statistics and with a switch on my kaleidoscope, statistical kaleidoscope, I realized we're talking about 4 facets of food, what I now call biological nutrition, psychological nutrition, spiritual nutrition, and social nutrition. So let me tell you what that looks like. The biological nutrition guideline is to eat fresh whole food in its natural state as often as possible, to be aware of feelings, emotions before, during, and after eating is one element of psychological nutrition, to dine in a pleasant emotional and aesthetic environment. The spiritual elements include eating with mindfulness, gratitude, and loving regard, which means bringing moment-to-moment non-judgmental awareness to every aspect of the meal, appreciating food and its origins authentically from the heart, savoring and flavoring food with loving regard, and uniting with others, eating with others in a pleasant atmosphere. And this is what it looks like. This is the definition I put together, which is whole person integrative eating is a holistic evidence-based 4-facet program that nourishes us multidimensionally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially. And I'm going to be telling you about research we've done. And we now know that this leads to weight loss and health and healing. So let me explain a little bit more about these 4 facets to demystify it for you. And again, ancient food wisdom, modern nutritional science. The biological nutrition facet is about eating fresh whole food in its natural state as often as possible. There are 3 elements to that. Get fresh food, choose whole food, and eat inversely, inverse eating. Fresh food means, I know many of you know this, but many people in the States don't know this because processed fast food is their normal, most of the time, way of eating. And when I say fresh food, that means eating fresh fruits and veggies and whole grains and beans and peas, nuts and seeds, with some lesser amounts of fresh whole dairy, fish, meat, and poultry. And that means, for example, having beans and veggies and perhaps baked chicken instead of fried chicken. It may mean having baked potato instead of French fries, or fresh corn instead of corn chips. And when I say whole, step number 2 in terms of the fresh whole food concept, it means eating fresh whole grains, for example, that include all the elements, the bran, the outside fiber part, the germ, the wheat germ, which has a reputation for being archetypal health food. That's where all the nutrients are in the grains when we have grains. And the endosperm is what we often call the white flour part of, if you're having, for example, wheat, a whole wheat kernel. And when you eat white flour, the bran has been removed, the germ with all the good nutrients has been removed, and you're left with the endosperm, which doesn't have too many nutrients in it. And step number 3 is to eat inversely, mostly plant-based foods, fruits and veggies and whole grains, beans and peas, nuts and seeds, with lesser amounts of fresh and lean animal foods, fish, meat, dairy, poultry, and when possible, organic, to stay away from what I call and lessen what I call chemical cuisine. For example, again, this is ancient food wisdom, modern nutritional science. The example I often give in terms of fresh whole and inverse eating, plant-based foods with lesser or no amounts of animal-based foods, is the Greek Mediterranean diet, which has such a reputation for being healthful. I'm sure most of you, all of you, have heard of it, are familiar with it. Well, many Americans interpret the Greek diet, if we give the Greek example of the Mediterranean diet, as dipping some bread into, if you're in a restaurant, into some olive oil, or perhaps having some red wine. The reality is, if you take Greece, for example, the reality is the Mediterranean diet means having meat perhaps 2 or 3 times a month. It may mean having chicken and fish 2 or 3 times a week. And the animal foods that are most typical in the Greek diet, version of the diet, is to have that wonderful Greek yogurt and some feta cheese in the daily diet, with a diet that is mostly fruits and veggies and whole grains and beans and peas and nuts and seeds and hummus, for example, and there are fresh, delicious olives. So the concept of the Mediterranean diet is fresh and whole and inverse eating, mostly plant-based foods with lesser amounts of animal foods. Psychological nutrition is about your food and feelings and behavior. And it means to be aware of feelings and thoughts before, during, and after eating. Ancient food wisdom, modern nutritional science. If you flash back 5,000 years ago, the original yogis were called rishis, and they used their own mind body as laboratories to figure out what to eat and the best way to eat so they could stay peaceful and calm and balanced, and so they could meditate and do yoga. And what they discovered is a diet that we would now call lacto-vegetarian. Many yogis and vegetarians in India still today will have a mostly plant-based diet. Here's the inverse eating again, with small amounts of dairy food, which is revered in India, unlike in the States where there are a lot of issues around and concerns around dairy. If you flash forward now to the 1970s, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a researcher named Judith Wortman took some rats and she put them in a maze and she fed them a very high carb diet meal, which I believe was potatoes, which is very dense in carbohydrates. And what she discovered, this is in the lifetime of many of us, the 1970s, what she discovered is that when you eat a high carb meal, which might be sugar, cookies, cake, it releases a natural hormone, a natural chemical in your system called serotonin. And that eventually goes to your brain. It takes about 20 minutes for this natural hormone to go to your brain. And serotonin calms and relaxes you. We now use food mood research very strongly oriented nowadays toward emotional eating, emotional eating, emotional eating. Well, it works. Lots of high carb foods, the mac and cheese and the brownies and the ice cream and cookies and cake that many people turn to for comfort food, it works because we now know it releases natural hormones and substances called serotonin, which do indeed calm and relax you. It has other negative side effects, but that's outside of this discussion right now. But I wanted to give you that concept that we now have food and mood research, which is verifying and validating what the ancient yogis figured out using their own mind body as a laboratory. The three facets of social nutrition are mindfulness, eating with mindfulness, gratitude, appreciation, blessing food, and also loving regard. An example of mindfulness is, in the context of whole person integrative eating, is to bring moment to moment non-judgmental awareness to every aspect of the meal. And an example of the mindfulness element is the concept of mindfulness and mindfulness eating comes from Buddhism, which is about 3,000 years old, 2,500 years old. And what we now know is, come back to the Ornish program, for example. What we now know is people who did the yoga and meditation in the Ornish Heart Disease Reversal Program, those who did the most meditation and yoga, combined with a no-fat added plant-based diet, were the ones who lost the most weight. Mindfulness affects the metabolism of food when you are eating. And an example of that is a researcher named Donald Morse took some students, female students, and had them meditate for 5 minutes before eating, and had others do mental arithmetic, which is what many of us do when we're eating. We're at our computers doing mental work or watching something that calls for cognitive uh, attention. And what he found out is that the students who meditated for 5 minutes before eating a high carb meal, but normal food, not sugar and cake, fresh whole food, they produced 22% more of an enzyme in their saliva called D-alpha amylase, which helps you break down and metabolize carbohydrate foods. They produced 22% more of D-alpha amylase than the students who were doing the mental arithmetic, which is what most of us are doing, eating while we're driving, eating while being distracted. And we now know that suggests to us that your consciousness, again, when you're eating, affects the way in which food is metabolized and ultimately, potentially, your weight and your health in many other ways, as you'll see. Gratitude and appreciation. We blessed food for many, many years. Some of your grandparents may have done that. You may remember that. It's not something we do right now, but bringing gratitude to food and blessing food has been shown, some research, for example, that has an effect on your heart and ultimately your health. One example of that is Larry Sherwitz, husband, behavioral scientist, Dean Ornish's director of research for many years, did research that showed that people who are self-involved tend to die from heart disease if they develop heart disease, and they tend to be at much higher risk for having heart disease. And he measured the risk for heart disease in terms of being self-involved with how much and how often they use the self pronouns I, me, my, and mine when they answered open-ended questions. So what he found is those who are more what he calls other-oriented, which means, again, you're coming from your heart and being to appreciate food, to appreciate anything, means being aware of and having gratitude for something other than yourself. And that affects health in many ways. Research at the Heart Math Institute in Northern California has also done hundreds of studies on the effect of loving regard, heartfelt gratitude and appreciation, and relating it to lower blood pressure and many other health benefits. Loving regard. Love infused food also, and eating with a loving consciousness and with others in a pleasant atmosphere, and flavoring food with loving regard, as Dr. Chopra alluded to and started this whole journey. That also has an effect on your health and well-being. And again, ancient food wisdom, modern nutritional science. An example is a researcher named Robert Nerem, N-E-R-E-M, did research with rabbits. And what he did is he fed them a very high cholesterol diet. And he had them in 3 levels of cages, 3 tiers of cages. And what he wanted to see if this high cholesterol diet would indeed produce heart disease and clog up arteries. And when he went to do the autopsies, what he found was 2/3 of the rabbits had pretty severe clogged arteries and coronary artery disease. About 1/3 had almost no or no clogging of the arteries. And he couldn't understand this. They were all fed the same diet. And he retraced the steps of his study, and what he found out was that the diminutive research assistant who's feeding the rabbits would take the rabbits in the middle cages out when she fed them these high cholesterol foods, and she would hold them. And it was those rabbits who did not develop heart disease. And he could not believe this, and he replicated the study and got the exact same results. So I'm going to pause for 2 seconds and answer a question that I very, 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 very often get with this, and come back to research that I told you about that Larry Sherwitz did with Dean Ornish. I'm very often asked the question, I call it the bargaining stage of the program. Well, Deborah, does that mean I can eat whatever I want and eat high fat, high cholesterol, high fat foods? And if I eat with loving regard, I'll be fine. I'm coming back to what I told you originally about the study that Larry did with Dr. Dean Ornish, that people always over the years have asked us, well, which one of the arms of the Ornish program, the 4 components, excuse me, is more important in terms of getting regression? And Larry's response is always, which leg of a dog is more important? All 4 elements of the Ornish program are statistically significant. So one is not going to give you the health benefits without all the others. It's an interconnected web. And as you'll see, as I should tell you more about our research, the 7 elements of whole person integrative eating are also an interconnected web of statistically significant variables that will give you the health benefits that you want. Social nutrition is about dining with family and friends, and that means uniting with others through food and eating with others in a pleasant atmosphere. And the classic study some of you may have heard of is the risotto study, which is a study that was done over many, many years. A researcher heard that the Italian, mostly Italian, excuse me, inhabitants of Risotto, Pennsylvania, even though they ate sausage and high-fat foods, and many were overweight, they did not develop heart disease. They were pretty healthy, and they lived to an old age. And a researcher went there for decades and followed them and studied them. And what he discovered is it was the healing power of social connection and relationship that, again, affected the way in which food was metabolized and protected their health. And when the children and grandchildren of these Risotto, Pennsylvania residents left and continued to eat the way they ate and went into the high stress world of many American cities and work, they started developing heart disease and diabetes and many of the other health problems and obesity that many other Americans experience. So again, we've learned that there is something very healing about relationships when you're eating. And I am not selling any books. This is research that I'm telling you about. Ultimately, nutritional anthropology. We're looking at ancient food wisdom validated by modern nutritional science. And I'm just letting you know that these 2 books that I have written have all this information in it. They're resources. Topic number 2, the research story here. Research that Larry and I have done on whole person integrative eating that I'm going to tell you about have been published in the journals, peer-reviewed medical journals, Explore, the Journal of Science and Healing, and also Integrative Medicine, a clinician's journal. This is not an opinion. This is not a philosophy. This is published research. The research story started with Spirituality and Health magazine. The editor-in-chief at the time contacted me because I had written some books on Whole Person Integrative Eating, that I then called Feeding the Body, Nourishing the Soul, to write an article about what I then called the Enlightened Diet. So I did. And he also invited me to do an article. I'm sorry, not an article, but an online e-course on the Enlightened Diet. And I created an 18-lesson e-course, 3 a week over 6 weeks, on whole person integrative eating. And Larry, research scientist, said to me, you know, your book, Healing Secrets of Food, contains an 80-item questionnaire about all these variables about the 4 facets of food and how you eat. He said, let's put up the 80-item questionnaire before people take the 18-lesson e-course and ask them to fill it out afterward, see if there's any change in their eating. So we did this, I did this, and 5,256 people completed the questionnaire and participated in this online whole person integrative eating course. And what we found was Larry looked at all this and he used a factor analysis to discover eating behaviors that are correlated or clustered together. He took the one question of the 80 about overeating and related the variable of overeating to the 79 other questions in the questionnaire. And what he discovered, of the 80 questions in what I now call What's Your Overeating Style self-assessment quiz, there were certain clusters, and he was able to identify 7 clusters that are linked to overeating. And from this, we identified what I now call the 7 overeating styles. And each overeating style is statistically significant. Remember, not one is more important than the other. And they're all, and each one is independently correlated with overeating and becoming overweight and obese. I call them fast foodism, emotional eating, food fretting, task snacking, sensory disregard, unappetizing atmosphere, and solo dining. And the 7 overeating styles, they comprise an interconnected web of feelings and emotions and food choices and eating behaviors linked with overeating, overweight, and obesity. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I want to get to the key important element here. 1, fast foodism, which we're all familiar with, eating mostly refined, fried, sweet, processed foods. 2, emotional eating is eating out of negative emotions instead of having a healthy appetite and feeling a healthy, I don't want to use the word hunger, but you're ready to eat. Instead, you're eating to perhaps self-medicate negative emotions such as sadness, anger, anxiety, depression. 3, food fretting, dieting. And the key concept is obsessing about the best way to eat. 4th, overeating style, I call it task snacking, eating while you're doing other activities, such as driving, watching TV, working at your computer. 5, sensory disregard. There were 21 variables in the sensory disregard overeating style. And it means just not tasting, smelling, enjoying the scent and the flavor of the food. 6, unpleasant atmosphere, both psychological and aesthetic. That may mean eating, shoving a muffin into your mouth while you're filling up at the gas station, or driving, or you're having an argument with somebody, or somebody around you is having an argument, or there's loud acid rock music, unless you like it. Also, all this is all the new normals. Eating alone more often than eating with others in a pleasant atmosphere. Again, all these are familiar to you, nothing shocking to any of you. What we found out is this: all 7 overeating styles are significantly and independently related to overeating frequency, all interconnected. And 5 of the 7 overeating styles were significantly related to being overweight and obese. The bottom line here is this: those who started off of the 5,256 RPs, research participants, who replaced the overeating styles with the elements of the whole person integrative eating dietary lifestyle, were the ones who lessened their overeating during this 18 lesson 6-week e-course and lost the most weight. That's huge. And the result of whole person integrative eating is based on 25 years of research that Larry and I have done. It's a scientifically sound, holistic roadmap for treating the root causes of overeating, overweight, and obesity. It's not an opinion. It is not a philosophy. It is not a diet. It's a dietary lifestyle and way of eating for life, which is what and how people ate for thousands of years before what I call eating by number, which is the norm in this culture now. And it's a model that contributes to whole person nutritional health, healing, and well-being. And this has been published in Explore, the Journal of Science and Healing. And David Riley, the editor at Explore, he described it as, I have to move something here to be able to read this. Whole person integrative eating provides a fresh perspective on our epidemic of overeating, overweight, and obesity, and identifies underlying causes of overeating and ensuing weight gain that, if replicated and has been replicated, could signal a paradigm shift in the field of nutrition. And Erica Oberg and Ryan Bradley are research scientists who have applied this program to diabetic patients, type 2 diabetics. And Erica has said that overeating, and published in peer-reviewed medical journal, overeating and obesity simply resolved as side effects of practicing whole person integrative eating. And Ryan said, eating habits and diabetes, how we eat, may be more important than what we eat. The eating behaviors in the whole person integrative eating program lowered blood sugar levels in type 2 diabetics more than what they ate. So again, this is published in peer-reviewed medical journals. Feel free to check it out. Here's the essence of the 7-step WPIE program. We've talked about this. Eat fresh whole foods in their natural state as often as possible. Be aware of your feelings. Dine in pleasant, emotional, and aesthetic environment. Eat with mindfulness, gratitude, and loving regard. And eat with others as often as possible in a pleasant atmosphere. Here's how this looks in real life. The overeating styles, which I briefly went over, are fast foodism. The antidote to that is fresh whole food, inverse eating also. Emotional eating, the antidote to that is to eat with positive feelings. The antidote to food fretting and obsessing about dieting and the best way to eat is appreciating food and its origins from the heart. Task snacking, multitasking, eating while you're doing other things. Again, all the new normals in our culture is to eat with mindfulness and being present and appreciating food when you're eating. Sensory disregard, not savoring, tasting, smelling, enjoying, knowing that you're eating, being aware you're eating and enjoying it, is to the antidote, the WPIE antidote, satisfy your senses when you're eating. I'll tell you one quick study on that. Some research that came out of Germany showed that when the RPs in their research just smelled, not put it in the food, but just smelled olive oil before eating, they reduced their caloric intake significantly just by the scent of the olive oil. One example of the ancient food wisdom, modern nutritional science. Unappetizing atmosphere, psychologically and aesthetically, is to eat in pleasant atmosphere. Solo dining, eating by yourself, is to share fare with others. Again, I define this as the first program scientifically proven to treat overeating, overweight, and obesity with the 7 WPIE steps that I just told you about and these 4 facets of food. And there is a book I just wrote. It came out February 4th of this year. It won 2 awards. The first award was the Gold Award winner in the health category from the, I forgot the name of it now, Book Excellence Awards. And I'm just letting you know this puts it all together for you if you have an interest in this. And this book is also one of the key books used in the certification program that I've put together for health professionals in whole person integrative eating. And the whole person integrative eating certification course, I call it Foundations of Whole Person Integrative Eating, started with Lisa Doherty, who is the founder of MedFit and the MedFit Education Foundation. And Lisa contacted me probably about a year and a half ago, and she had read the spirituality and health article that I wrote about 20 years ago. And she contacted me and said, whatever happened with the Enlightened Diet? And I told her we've published research and I've written some books on it. And last year, she invited me to do a webinar on whole person integrative eating. And I did. I was honored. Finally, a physician, one of the physicians who has written comments about whole person integrative eating is David Reed Malloy. And he wrote that whole person integrative eating delivers a profoundly powerful evidence-based program for sustainable freedom from the ravages of overweight and obesity. And he has been working with his patients using the whole person integrative eating program. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And if you want to contact me directly, please go to my website, integrativeeating.com, email me in the comment section on the bottom of each page.
Deborah, thank you very, very much. That was very informative.
My pleasure.
As I said, I thought especially all the research was very well represented, and that's something that's not always done. So, and your association with Dean Ornish over the years speaks volumes. So we are very happy to have you, and hopefully we'll have you back in the future.